Canon announced the EOS R back in October of 2018, and it became available shortly thereafter. I was actually interested in this camera and became very disappointed. You see, the EOS R was just a mirrorless version of the 5D, but it didn't offer the same frame rates. With continuous autofocus, it was very difficult to get about 3 frames per second with everything in focus. And the video specs? Well, I was starting to look for the Sony a7S III. I was done with Canon. I was sick and tired. I just really didn't see this as an exciting camera, knowing that I was going to have to wait another 2 to 3 years before I could see an update of this camera. But what I didn't realize at the time is how significant this camera was. Not to Sony users, Panasonic or Nikon, but to Canon users, because this was Canon's way of saying we're serious about full-frame mirrorless cameras. In fact, shortly thereafter, Canon came out and made an announcement saying that they're done with the EF mount. They're not going to invest any more money into it. They'll still continue to make goods that are selling, but all the investment is going into the R system, or the RF mount. And then in January, we got the Canon EOS RP, which was the lowest cost full-frame mirrorless camera on the market then, and even today at $999, is still the cheapest entry-level full-frame mirrorless camera. These cameras were lacking in capabilities. In terms of video, well, Sony had them beat. And even on the still side, they weren't looking that good. And today, they haven't aged very well. But I've got good news for you. We are expecting an EOS RP replacement. It's not going to be called the EOS RP Mark II. I don't know the exact designation, but I'll get to that in just a moment. The important thing is that this EOS RP replacement is going to have a price point of about $799, or it could go as high as $899 as its regular price. And that's a good $100 off the current price for the Canon EOS R. So in this marketplace, how are they going to possibly drop the price? Well, that EVF, that's going to come off. It's going to be an option that you can put on later like they do with the EFM mount. And for a lot of people at the entry level, this might do perfectly fine. Otherwise, just purchase it as an extra option. Outside of that, we don't have any other rumored specs for this camera. And with the camera supposed to be announced anytime between now and up to CP+, I would expect to start to get some rumors pretty soon. But what we can expect is it to have a faster processor, to be faster at producing video as well as the autofocus system. And this should mean slightly sharper 4K video. But I wouldn't expect to go really anything north of 4K 30 frames per second. And as far as stills go, I think somewhere around 3 frames per second with continuous autofocus guaranteed. And they might announce anywhere from 5 to 8 frames per second, but without continuous autofocus. I really think 3 to 5 frames is kind of where this camera is going to be. Outside of that, we don't know too much. But you can't really talk about the Canon EOS RP without talking about the EOS R. Again, I want to reiterate that Canon has said there will be no EOS R Mark II. In fact, if you look at the EOS R's initial price of around $2299 and the Canon EOS R6 of $2499, the EOS R6 is really taking that same price point, but offering so much more. But Canon has a hole between the EOS RP replacement and the R6. And what they're going to do is they're going to put another camera that fits in the middle. So looking at around $799 and what, $2499, 32, around $1,599 to $1,699 for the camera. And as far as specifications, well, it's supposed to be mid-spec between the two cameras. Now, because the video on the R6 isn't all that great in terms of what it can do, I don't expect Canon to cripple the capabilities that much, but I can see them certainly cutting back on the stills capabilities. I mean, the EOS R6, after all, is a mini 1DX Mark III, so I could see them pull back the frame rate to maybe 10 or 12 frames per second, significantly reduce the rolling shutter, because let's face it, the rolling shutter on the EOS R and the RP is absolutely terrible. And one thing I would really like to see, and is certainly possible, is to give us oversample to 1080, especially on the RP. But we'll just have to wait and see if that pans out. So that's all we have on the EOS R. Again, I think there's a greater chance we're going to see the EOS RP as far as a spring availability or spring announcement. It could be announced anytime between now and CP+, which is, I know, before spring, because spring doesn't happen until, what, March the 20th. But the RP, very high possibility. The EOS R replacement, not as much. But now I want to talk about what is really exciting. First of all, I want to say the Canon 90D, that's it. No more DSLRs. We're not going to see a Canon 90D successor in a DSLR. Canon is pretty much done. And this is the good news. We are expecting several Canon APS-C cameras coming to the RF mount this spring. So we can expect an announcement anytime between now and up to CP+. And here's what the landscape can look like. A lot of you are looking for a high-end camera, one that would take the place of what the 7D Mark III was supposed to do. Now, the 7D Mark II right now, if you compare it to the 90D, well, it's really out of date, but they're going to have a high-end camera that's designed for the same marketplace that the 7D was. It's going to be for wildlife, for photography. Now, I could see it having a sensor size of right around what the Canon 90D has, something between 30 and 34 megapixels. I really don't see them pushing past that, and I'd even be quite happy if they went around 26 megapixels. It's going to have a faster processor. It's going to be able to do really good video. It's going to be able to do 4K video, I would suspect, and I wouldn't be surprised if they allow it to do 4K 60. But the real thing that I really expect them to do is to offer oversampled 1080, and that would make a huge boom, because when we're talking about APS-C, an awful lot of people are still shooting 1080 even in full frame. A lot of people want 1080 for their clients, and why shoot in 4K if you can shoot in 1080 and the camera internally does 4K oversampled 1080? You save on having to have really powerful computers. So if Canon can go with this oversampled 1080, they did it with the EOS R5C, for the first time bringing out oversampled 1080, well, oversampled 2K, which isn't too far off of oversampled 1080. They can do it. Sony does it. So I'd expect to see that in the high-end camera, and we really do expect an announcement of that camera. And I think there's room for an entry level as well. And I would see, because if we look at the DSLR market right now, it's really overcrowded. We've got the SL series, which is really cheap, the SL1, the SL2, the SL3. We've got the Rebel series, which is a little bit higher end. We got the T7i, the T8i. Of course, we've got the 90D, which sits above that. We've got the mirrorless version of the 90D. We got the M50. It's a very, very crowded place, and I could see Canon coming out with a camera that's $599. It's the lowest priced APS-C on their mirrorless system, and it won't do 4K video. I could see that, but what I see is 4K oversampled video, 4K oversampled 1080 to give you a really sharp 1080. It's perfect for a lot of people, especially if you're at that $600 price point. You don't want an expensive computer. You just want to produce really good detailed 1080 video, good enough for YouTube, good enough for your friends and family. And in my view, really good detailed 1080 is more than worth the price. So what else can they do? Well, again, slightly faster processors to make the autofocus system faster and better. Give us that same dual pixel autofocus too, and give us a lot of the capabilities that you saw in those low-end DSLRs. Just make things a little bit more faster, a more intuitive menu system, and all that wonderful stuff. And of course, that leaves a gaping hole right in the middle where we'd see the successor to the 90D in the R system. And for that camera, again, oversampled 1080, but give us 4K, give us 4K 30, give us more detailed 4K 30. Don't give us 4K 60. I mean, I would like to see it, but I could see them just saying, okay, you know what? If you want slow motion, you can get that in 1080. They'll give us 120 frames per second once again, but with a faster processor. The autofocus system will work. And I think that's the biggest thing holding back the 90D, was not having the autofocus system working. Now, you could shoot with a high f-stop and kind of get around that. But seriously, a wonderful autofocus system. Put dual pixel autofocus 2 in the 90D to be able to give us 120 frames per second in 1080, 4K 30, more detailed 1080, but not give us an oversampled 4K. Leave that for the higher end version, and then of course for people who want to get into full frame. So that's the focus of the next couple of months. We're going to see an RP replacement and most likely several APS-C R system cameras. But I don't want to leave you there. I want to leave you with some other cameras that we are expecting to get some sort of nod or announcement later in the year, like the second half around September, October, or November. The Canon high megapixel camera that's been rumored for, well, going back to 2020, is rumored for later this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if this one goes into 2023. And like the 5D Mark IV R and RS, we're going to see it based on the R5. And megapixel size, we're looking at north of 100 megapixels. It might just be 102. I don't know exact number, but it's going to be north of 100 megapixels. Frame rate most likely around 10 frames per second. So again, probability is not as good as the APS-C cameras or the RP replacement. We're looking at second half. But there's also the R1, and I've talked about this previously. Rumors are we will get an announcement in Q4 and maybe availability to start shipping in Q4 as well, just like the Nikon Z9. I mean, it just started shipping on the 23rd of December with the announcement back on October the 28th, and I could see Canon doing the same thing with the R1. Don't expect it at the Olympics. We might see some Canon cameras with some logos covered, and they might be testing it out, but don't expect an announcement and shipping until later in the year. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if that gets pushed into January of 2023. And to me, I think that's the most logical time for the R1. January is a big month for Canon. They did the 1DX Mark III in 2020. This year, they did the R5C. So we'll just have to wait and see. And we know very little about the R1 as well. But there is one sad topic to talk about, and that's the EFM mount. We had high hopes of seeing some updated cameras at the higher end, like the M6, the M5, but sadly that doesn't appear to be the case. Canon has already come out and said that they've stopped development on anything new on the EF mount, and that's EF, EFS, and EFM. They're focusing on the R system or the RF mount. So that means we're not going to get any new cameras. It doesn't mean Canon's going to stop making what is already on the market. As long as it keeps selling, Canon's not going to say no. They're not going to take that. They're not going to leave that money on the table. They're going to keep producing those cameras. But as the APS-C R system cameras take off, that's when we'll see the demise of the EFM mount. And I feel for you if you've got an EFM camera, especially if you don't have the EF to EFM adapter, because EFM glass, there's no migration strategy. There's no adapter. You can't bring this over to the R system, and you won't be able to because there's not enough room in the camera related to back focus to allow this to happen. Your only hope, if you're on the EFM system and if you're still looking at buying lenses, get the EF to EFM adapter and buy EF glass. Don't even touch EFS, just get EF glass because that can be transferable to the R system, making a lot of people happy. So it is sad. I predicted several times that we were done with the EFM mount, and it looks like that is true. And there were plans for other cameras. There were even plans for Canon to come out with a 5D Mark V as well as a 7D Mark III, as you can see from this shot here. But the last couple of years has made it tough for everybody. Even just getting cameras out. Canon just announced their financials, and while they beat expectations, they still pushed out fewer cameras this year than they did last year because supply chains are shot. Shipping channels are shot. It's a challenge for any business to produce. And so Canon's made the decision to just completely focus on the mirrorless system, and they're completely focusing on the R system, which has the RF mount. This helps with economies of scale, especially as we're projected to have total worldwide units shipped in 2021, barely approaching 5 million units. So if we can use the same processors over and over in the same sensors, and just use firmware to determine what features are available to the user, that will help contain costs and allow profit margins to be at a point where Canon says, yes, we can still survive in a market with 5 million units. But other companies like Panasonic, which are large multinational conglomerates, might start to look at and wonder, is this unit profitable enough for us to keep it? But Canon, Nikon definitely are here for the long run, and it looks like Sony certainly is too. But that lets us wonder a little bit more about Pentax. I haven't heard much about Pentax. And that camera company, formerly known as Olympus, formerly known as OM Digital, now OM Systems, well, it sounds like they're going to be around for a little while with an announcement of an R or a WOW camera coming out in February. I think it's the 23rd, 24th, or 25th of this month. Again, right on the heels of CP+. But that's it for now. That's all I wanted to talk to you about. Let you know the major camera announcements we can expect over the next couple of months that will be available in spring, and a couple of teasers of some major cameras coming out in the end of the year or leading into the Q1 of 2023. Oh, one more thing. Please do me a favor. Please like and subscribe. It really does help this channel grow. And to be honest with you, it really does give me a virtual pat on the back. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.